Hello, and welcome back to MysHistory. I'm Rhonda, and this is where I talk about odd or unsolved historical mysteries. And if that sounds like something that you might be interested in, then please consider subscribing. I hope you have all been well, and since it is now October, the month of all things spooky and scary and Halloweeny, I thought it might be a good time to dive into the history of the Salem witch trials. As an aside, before I get totally into this, I am not here to bash on Christians because I am one. I am not here to bash on Christianity. I'm also not here to bash on any other religion that one may choose to follow, that people may choose to follow no religion at all. And so if you have a negative comment to make about such things, please go make them elsewhere and not here. This is just me telling the history of how we got to the Salem witch trials. So you remember like in 1692, 1693 when, people were accused of witchcraft in Massachusetts? Good times. According to history, more than 200 people would be accused of practicing it. 30 would be found guilty. 19 of those would be hung, 14 women and 5 men. History also says that a man by the name of Giles Corey was executed by being pressed to death for his refusal to make a plea one way or the other, and at least 5 other people would die in prison. So what was up with this, and how did we get to witchcraft? Well, the hunt for people practicing the devil's magic didn't start in colonial America. In fact, they were a little behind the curve of the whole witchcraft craze. Centuries before Salem, many practicing Christians and others who practice other religions believed that the devil himself could give certain people, witches specifically, the power to harm other people in return for their loyalty to the Dark One. The first witchcraft craze would occur throughout Europe starting in the 1300s, and it would end in the 1600s, where tens of thousands of witches, mostly women, were executed. In fact, between the years of 1580 and 1630, which was the Counter-Reformation and the wars on religion in Europe, an estimated 50,000 people were burned at the stake. Roughly 80% of those were women, mostly over the age of 40. You actually have to go back to medieval times to get an idea of what the heck was going on, really, with all this witchcraft finger pointing. It was during this time when mainstream Christian doctrine denied the existence of witches and witchcraft, claiming it all to be pagan superstition. This would change, allegedly, with the works of Thomas Aquinas. Who was Thomas? He was an Italian Dominican friar, philosopher, Catholic priest, and doctor of the church. He would lay the groundwork toward the shift in the Christian doctrine, leading theologians to begin accepting the possibility of some collaboration with the devil, which resulted in a person's ability to obtain certain, but real, supernatural powers. This would lead to inquisitions and a growth in witch phobia all throughout Europe. Gregory IX, the head of the Catholic Church and ruler of papal states, starting in March 1227 and lasting until his death in 1241, would issue a papal bull in 1233 establishing a new branch of Inquisition in Toulouse, France. This was intended to prosecute Christian groups who were considered heretical and included the Cathars and the Waldensians. These Dominican inquisitors would become the most zealous prosecutors of people accused of witchcraft leading up to the Reformation. Many of the records kept by the French inquisitors have been lost. It's believed that many of the inquisitors were attacked and their papers stolen, likely by family and friends of those accused, as the much hated inquisitors would travel from town to town seeking out witches. This was likely an attempt to disrupt the proceedings, or at the very least, to save the reputations of the accused as well as any of their descendants. The largest number of fatalities during the European witch trials was between the years of 1560 and 1630. There's a debate over which witch trials were the most intense, Catholic or Protestant. For example, in Catholic Spain and Portugal, there were very few trials, as the Spanish and Portuguese inquisitors preferred to focus on the crime of public heresy as opposed to witchcraft. But in Protestant Scotland, they had a larger number of trials. Protestant Netherlands were among the fewest in Europe. The largest scale of mass witch trials were in the autonomous territories of Catholic prince bishops in southern Germany and were the most infamous. Hermann Lahr would describe how these mass trials affected the public. These southern Catholic German witch trials would happen in waves between the 1560s and the 1620s. They resulted in hundreds of executions of all ages, sexes, and classes. And these trials included the Trier witch trials, which lasted from 1581 to 1593, and they were described as possibly the largest documented witch trials in history due to the number of executions. In 1587, about 368 people were executed in a mass execution, which may have been the largest in peacetime Europe. This only counts the number executed in the city of Trier itself, and the total number is unknown, but 1,000 has been considered and never confirmed. That's a lot of people. The Fulda witch trials from 1603 to 1606, which is one of the 4 largest witch trials in Germany, resulting in the death of approximately 250 people. The Eichstätt witch trials from 1613 to 1630, resulting in the execution of at least 224 people. The Wurzburg witch trials went from 1626 to 1631, took place during the 30 Years' War, and resulted in hundreds of people being burned at the stake, sometimes after being beheaded, sometimes alive. The numbers aren't known for sure, but 157 in the city of Wurzburg, 219 in the city proper, and an estimated 900 were executed or died while in custody, and the Bamberg witch trials from 1626 to 1631. Over an extended time, approximately 1,000 people were executed. This was also taking place during the 30 Years' War. So you got all of this stuff going on, and in 1590, the North Berwick witch trials in Scotland would start. These are noteworthy because King James VI, yes, that King James VI, the son of Lord Darnley and Mary Queen of Scots, he would personally become involved. The king had a fear that he developed in which he believed that witches were planning to kill him. This would happen after he suffered from storms while he traveled to Denmark to claim his bride, Anne of Denmark, earlier in the year. Medieval royalty. Again. They were probably related. Okay. Anyway, upon his return to Scotland, he had heard of the trials happening in North Berwick, and he ordered all suspects to be brought to him directly. He would come to believe that Francis Stuart, the 5th Earl of Bothwell, who I can't find a portrait of, but was a first cousin to King James VI, Francis's father, James, another Earl of Bothwell, was the chief suspect in the murder of King James VI's father, Lord Darnley. Now that James, the Earl of Bothwell, married Mary Queen of Scots. Okay, so anyway, King James VI would come to believe that his cousin, Francis, was a witch, which would lead Francis to fear for his life. He would later be outlawed as a traitor and die poor in Italy. The king would establish royal commissions to hunt down all the witches in the realm and highly recommended torture when dealing with those who were suspected. Great guy. He even wrote a book on the menace that witches allegedly pose to society. By the mid-17th century, the witch trials in Europe were starting to kind of fade out, save for on the fringes of Europe. The Nordic countries reached a peak in trials in a few areas. The Torsaker witch trials of Sweden in 1674 resulted in 71 people being executed in a single day. The Salzburg witch trials in Austria would have 139 people executed between the years of 1675 and 1690. The reason so many trials was fading out was due to some authorities in the Roman Inquisition acknowledging that through their own trials they had, quote, found scarcely one trial conducted legally. Really? It was becoming more difficult to prove witchcraft in accordance with the legal process, and as such, there was a decline in the trials in Europe. Guess you couldn't just go around pointing fingers at people being witches with no proof. And now we get to the witch phobia of colonial America. There was quite a bit going on at that time that would lead up to the witch trials. In 1689, English rulers William and Mary would start a war with France in the colonies. They would take place mostly in upstate New York, Nova Scotia, and Quebec, and they would send refugees into the Salem village in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is present-day Danvers. This influx of new residents would create a strain on resources in Salem and aggravate the already existing rivalry between families with ties to wealth in the port of Salem and those dependent on agriculture. There was also the harsh reality of life in rural Puritan communities, specifically Salem Village, including the after effects of the war, a smallpox epidemic, and fears of attacks from neighboring Native Americans. Also, the long-standing rivalry of Salem town, which is present-day Salem. So basically Salem and Danvers. All of this was basically just like this simmering pot of tensions which would explode into the witch trials and further add fuel to a fire and lead to suspicions and resentment toward neighbors, as well as a fear of outsiders. In 1692, when Elizabeth Parris, age 9, and Abigail Williams, age 11, started having fits that included violent contortions and uncontrollable outbursts of screaming, William Griggs, a local doctor, would diagnose the girls as bewitched. When other young girls in the community, Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Elizabeth Hubbard, Mary Calcutt, and Mary Warren, started to exhibit similar symptoms in late February, arrest warrants were issued for the Parris' Caribbean slave, Tituba, as well as 2 other women, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, who was a poor, elderly woman. These 3 women would be arrested after the girls stated that the 3 women bewitched them. Apparently, all it took to be guilty of a crime was to be poor, old, or both, and to have some influential names accuse you of being responsible for all of their ills. Elizabeth Hubbard would be one of the main accusers in the trials that would follow. Elizabeth was the maidservant to Dr. Griggs, so she was probably privy to first-hand knowledge of the symptoms involved in the fits experienced by the other girls. Due to her age, 17, she was allowed to testify under oath at the trials, and she was known for being thrown into these fits at trial. In fact, during her testimony in the trial of Elizabeth Proctor, Hubbard reportedly went into a deep trance and was unable to speak, but went on record to say the following. Hubbard would level more accusations, filing 40 legal complaints and testifying 32 times. History says that she gave her last testimony on January 7th of 1693. Her testimonies would lead to the arrest of 17 people, 13 of which were hanged and 2 of which would die in jail. So now we get back to Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. All 3 women were brought before a magistrate and they were interrogated over several days. Each of the Sarahs would claim innocence against the accusations, but Tituba confessed, likely to save herself if she agreed, and she was quoted as saying, "The devil came to me and bid me serve him." She would go on to describe images of black dogs and red cats and yellow birds and a black man who wanted her to sign his book, which she did. Tituba would then state that there were several other witches out to destroy the Puritans and started naming names. This would land Tituba and the 2 Sarahs in jail. Now the hysteria is spreading, and there were others who would be accused of being a witch, including Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse, who were both upstanding members in both their community and churches. The 4-year-old daughter of Sarah Good would also be accused of this witchcraft and being a witch. Confess now. Now that the seed of paranoia was planted, everyone was afraid, and accusations of witchcraft would follow for months. How could it not when Martha Corey was accused? If she was a witch, who else could be, while also attending church services and being outstanding members of their community? When the magistrates interrogated Sarah Good's young daughter, 4 years old, they confused her timid answers as being a confession to witchcraft by a 4-year-old. Ever talk to a 4-year-old? They have a conversation with a 4-year-old? Witchcraft. The questioning would get more serious as time went on, and dozens of people from Salem and other Massachusetts villages were brought in and questioned. Eventually, this would lead to Governor William Phips to establish a special court of oyer to hear and terminer to decide in May of 1692. The first case that this special court would hear was that of Bridget Bishop, who was an older woman known, quote, for her gossipy habits and promiscuity. When asked if she committed witchcraft, she responded, quote, "I am as innocent as the child unborn." Apparently, this was not convincing, and she was found guilty of witchcraft and hanged on June 10th, becoming the first person to be hanged on what would become known as Gallows Hill. After the hanging of Bridget, a respected minister, Cotton Mather, would write a letter to the court asking them not to allow spectral evidence, testimony about dreams and visions. The court would ignore this request and sentence 5 more people in July, 5 more in August, and 8 in September to be hanged for the crime of witchcraft. Increase Mather, the son of Cotton, interesting name, would denounce the use of spectral evidence, saying, quote, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than one innocent person be condemned." Governor Phips, whose own wife was questioned for witchcraft, would prohibit any further arrests, release many accused witches, and then dissolve the special court by October 29th. This would be replaced with a superior court of judicature and did not allow spectral evidence as testimony. With this change, only 3 out of 56 defendants was condemned. Governor Phips would eventually pardon all of those who were in prison on the charge of witchcraft by May of 1693, but the damage had already been done. All told, 19 people would be hanged, and one man, Giles Corey, who was 71 years old at the time, was pressed to death with heavy stones. Several people would die in jail. As I said at the beginning, in all, almost 200 people had been accused of practicing the devil's magic based on nothing more than what a person said. Amazing how fear can grip people into doing things that they would not normally do. What are your thoughts about the Salem witch trials? Or any of the witch trials that happened throughout Europe? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Hit that bell icon to be notified anytime I post a new video. Until next time, stay safe out there and watch out for witches. Bye.